The bear came back to the old lighthouse every storm. The secret it guarded shocked everyone. The lighthouse had always belonged to storms. When the sea turned savage and wind ripped salt from the waves, the tall white tower on the cliff answered with its slow, faithful sweep of light. Fishermen in the cove trusted it like a prayer. Children dared each other to run to its foot on calm summer nights. But in winter, when gales came up from nowhere and the spray stung like 100 tiny knives, the lighthouse felt lonelier than usual, a single point of defiance against the dark. Mara had kept that light for 7 years. The job suited her, long hours, steady tasks, a rhythm that left little room for grief to rove. People in the town said she had the lighthouse in her bones, careful, stubborn, unafraid. After her husband's boat failed to come home one autumn, the tower became more than work. It became shelter, a place where she could measure the world in pulsing beams and tide charts and small, necessary chores. So when the bear first appeared, she felt the world tilt in a small, impossible way. It was after a night storm, the kind that left seafoam tangled in hedgerows and washed driftwood onto the beach. Mara climbed the cliff path with a thermos and an extra blanket, meaning only to check the lantern and clear the gutters. From the headland, she saw a dark shape on the rocks below, massive, hunched, utterly still against the blowing spray. For a moment she thought it was driftwood carved by the waves. Then it lifted its head. The bear's coat was slick with salt. Its eyes, when they caught the lighthouse beam, were strange and soft in the gloom. It didn't eat the stranded fish or quarrel with the gulls. Instead, it sat facing the sea as if listening for something carried on the wind. Each time the beam swept across the cliff, the bear lifted its great head and watched the light pass, then sank back into patient stillness. By the time Mara reached the path's edge, the animal had not moved. It hadn't fled, it simply watched. In that rigid calm there was an intent that felt like a question. The town would whisper of odd sightings, of omens and superstition, but Mara, who had lived with loss and lighthouse nights, recognized something else, a vigil. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, poured steaming tea into the thermos, and sat on the cold stone wall, watching the two solitary lights, the lamp above and the dark creature below, keep their lonely watch. Mara's days were measured in small certainties: oil checks at dawn, log entries in the afternoon, polishing the brass till it shone like sun on the sea. The routine kept grief at bay the way a tide keeps the shoreline, steady, inevitable, shaping the edges of her life. She rose before the gulls, brewed coffee so strong it cut through the salt, and walked the cliff path as if memorizing every loose stone. The lighthouse was both her duty and her prayer. People in the town respected her privacy. They left supplies on the lower landing, called in on the radio when storms turned vicious, and sometimes in summer, brought her rye bread or a jar of preserved plums. Children waved from the headland and shouted silly warnings about ghosts of shipwrecked sailors. Mara would smile and pass them a handful of stale biscuits. She liked that life still made space for ordinary kindness. At night, the lamp's beam spun a slow, faithful arc, and she listened to the sea as if it were a conversation with someone who had once been there. Her husband's absence wrapped itself around her in the quiet hours, not sharp sorrow anymore, but a hollow companion she learned to live alongside. Some nights she would set 2 plates at the small kitchen table, out of habit and stubbornness, and leave the second one untouched. So when the bear began coming, Mara noticed details others might miss: the animal's timing, always when the weather worsened, the way it seemed to face the sound of the surf rather than the scent of stranded fish. Once she left a bit of smoked herring at the path's edge, more to see whether it would take it than to feed it. The bear approached, sniffed, and then turned away, its attention fixed on the same unseen direction. Over tea, she told the younger Coast Guard about it. He raised his eyebrows and joked about coastal spirits, but she saw his curiosity deepen. "Maybe it's waiting for someone," he said quietly. Mara did not answer. She felt the same strange recognition she had when she first found the animal, a soldier of patience standing guard in a place that had known loss. That night, after securing the lamp and checking the log, Mara climbed the path once more. She sat on the stone wall with her thermos and watched the bear below. In the rhythm of the light and the sea, she sensed a story forming: 2 lonely sentries, one human, one wild, keeping watch over what the wind had taken. When word of the cliff bear reached the village, it threaded into the old conversations that gathered around the pub hearth and the fishmonger's stall. Greyport was a town stitched to the sea. Everyone carried a story about tides and wrecks, about nights the lamps failed and the ocean took what it wanted. The bear's vigil slipped easily into that ledger of losses. Mara listened more than she spoke. She had learned that grief in a coastal town came in layers: practical advice overlaid with myth, so she went to the places where stories lived: the harbor, the diner at dawn, the bench where the old men argued about weather. It was there she met Jonah, a weathered fisherman who remembered the old Lighthouse family before Mara's time. "You know the Rowan place," he said, when she asked about past tragedies. His voice was rough as rope, but his eyes were soft with memory. "Used to be the lightkeeper with his little girl, Elsa, I think her name was. That family were different. Friends to everyone. Left a loaf out for gulls and crumbs for visiting foxes. Folks respected that house, it fed more than lamps." Mara pressed for more. Jonah's jaw worked a little, and he spat into the gloom. "Storm came out of nowhere one fall," he went on. "Ship ran aground beyond the reef. The light was doing all it could, but he let the rest hang like wet rope. Next morning, the Rowans were gone. The father gone to the cliffs searching, the little girl, no one saw her after that tide. They say the sea took her, or the storm scattered her footprints. People tried to help, dug the rocks, listened for cries, but around them, the town clock ticked on." Mara felt the edges of Jonah's sentence settle into her like sea salt. The bear's posture on the rocks, so intent, so patient, slowly took on a shape she could read. If the Rowans had been friends to the wild, if a child had vanished where lanterns could not reach, perhaps this bear had been part of that family's life. That thought was a small, sharp grief of its own. She left Jonah with a promise to search records at the harbor office and to speak with Mrs. Rowan's sister, who still kept the garden next door. The more she learned, the deeper the sense grew that the bear's vigil might be less about omens and more about remembrance, an animal holding onto a human absence as if it were its own. The storm arrived with no etiquette. Wind clawed over the cliff, rain flensed sideways, and the sea heaved as if trying to rewrite the coastline. Mara kept the lamp turning, cables groaning under the strain, while the town below secured shutters and prayed in a dozen quiet ways. The bear did not come that evening, at least not until the storm had its fill and the sea began to cough up the things it had swallowed. When dawn came, the beach was litter: foam-tangled kelp, planks, a mangled crate, and small shining objects tossed up like trophies. Mara walked the strand after her rounds, boots sinking into sand slick with silt, the light from the tower making the world a narrow, honest place. She had half a mind to turn back when something small and pale snagged her eye among the debris. It was a toy, a water-worn wooden boat, paint peeled to the grain, but unmistakably a child's. Attached to it by a frayed string was a tiny brass locket, blackened at the edges. Mara's breath stuttered. She cupped it, the metal cold as river stone, and saw, in a circle of soot, the ghost of an engraving, a simple flower and a single initial E. For a moment the wind swallowed her. The name Jonah had whispered at the pub slipped into place: Elsa. The hair on her neck prickled with the weight of a story finally loosening its knot. She did not keep the locket. Mara carried it to the keeper's cottage and wrapped it in an oilcloth. She walked straight to the cliff, where the bear had come to sit each storm-swept night, and found it there, drenched and steady, silhouette like a sentry against the heaving sea. The animal lifted its head as she approached, nostrils flaring, eyes aware and unbearably human. Mara laid the little boat and clasped Locket on the rock between them. The bear sniffed, nudged them gently with its snout, and then for the first time, let out a sound that was not grief alone, something that trembled like recognition. Mara, hands iced by the wind, understood then. The object had returned not just as flotsam, but as a bridge, proof that the child the town had mourned and the animal that had kept watch belonged to the same vanished moment. She wrapped the locket carefully and kept it safe. The town would need to know. The truth, whatever shape it took, would ripple through Greyport like a tide. Mara walked into the village square with the locket wrapped in oilcloth like a fragile confession. News of the washed-up debris spread faster than any gull: the toy, the little boat, the locket marked with an E. People gathered by the quay, faces scrubbed raw by salt and wind, eyes already brimming with the old grief that had once been pushed under boards and left to bob along. Jonah met her at the dock, and when she opened the oilcloth, his weathered hands trembled. He ran a thumb along the blackened metal until the soot came away, revealing the faint flower and the single initial. "Elsa," he said, voice catching. "That's hers." The name loosened something in a dozen throats. Mothers clutched scarves, old men bowed their heads. They brought the locket to Mrs. Rowan's sister, who lived next to the ruined keeper's house. The woman waited on her sagging porch, knitting gone slack in her lap. When the locket was opened and a faint, soot-stained photograph fell into her palm, she wept as if the years folded back on themselves. The picture showed the Rowan family smiling on a summer day, the father with a cap, the mother with flower on her sleeve, and a small girl with braids and a bright ribbon tied at the end. And there in the background, unmistakably, was a large bear standing at ease near the garden fence, as if part of the photograph's ordinary life. The room shifted. The bear in the photograph matched every detail Mara had noted in the cliff sentinel, the light patch across the shoulder, the calm, watchful eyes. The ribbon in the girl's hair looked like the one wearily tied around the bear's neck in years past by some child's game. The evidence stacked itself into a truth too intimate to deny. The Rowans had not only welcomed the sea and the light into their home, they had welcomed wildlife, and the bear had been, in its way, family. Word spread like tidewater. People who had feared the cliff bear now came with softened steps. Some brought blankets, others left small offerings at the lighthouse base. They no longer muttered about omens. Instead they spoke of friendship, of a bond that had survived a storm and grief, and of a child who had been part of both human and animal worlds. Mara, standing on the cliff with a locket heavy in her palm, watched the bear below turn its face to the sea, and for a long aching moment, felt the town's sorrow and its strange, healing understanding overlap. When the truth spread through Greyport, it changed the town as if a long-held wound had finally been named. People who once crossed the headland quickly now lingered, carrying small offerings and quiet apologies. They left jars of salted fish on the lower path, tied bright ribbons to the railings, and placed a neat circle of stones where the surf cleaned the shore. The lighthouse, which had always been a marker for lost things, now became a place of reunion of a different sort, not of the living returned, but of memory honored. Mara watched it all with a steady heart. She walked the cliff each evening, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by Jonah or the Coast Guard youth, and always with the locket folded in her pocket. The bear continued to come when storms rolled in, as faithful as the lamp above. But something had softened in her movements. Her pacing was less frantic. When she sat on the rocks, she seemed to listen with an edged sorrow that was more acceptance than torment. The town built a small memorial at the eastern spit, a simple wooden post engraved with the name Elsa, a ring of driftwood, and a place beneath it set aside for flowers and tiny toys the wind could not carry back to sea. They did not try to move the mystery into neat words. Instead, they left space to grieve, to remember, and to stand with the bear in the way a community might stand together after any sudden loss. One night, months later, a harsh gale unrolled across the cove. Mara climbed to the lantern room and watched the beam sweep ocean and cliff and the dark shape below. The bear sat at the memorial's edge, head bowed, rain beating along her muzzle. Mara poured 2 cups of tea, one for herself and in spirit, one for the animal that had kept its lonely watch. She stepped down to the path and, from a respectful distance, set a small wreath of wildflowers at the base of the driftwood ring. The bear rose and padded closer, sniffed the offering, and then, in a moment that stitched the town to the wild, lay down facing the sea. She did not grieve with frantic claws now, but with a watchful patience that matched the lighthouse's own steady sweep. Around them, people said prayers or simply stood in silence, the sound of the waves a hymn for what had been lost and what would be kept. Mara felt a softness in her chest, a warmth like the lamp's glow. The town had learned something the sea had been teaching all along, that love survives the fiercest storms if we tend it, honor it, and let it be remembered. The bear's vigil became for Greyport a promise that some bonds transcend language, and that in the quiet, shared sorrow, healing can begin. And so, on stormy nights when the sea remembers, a lonely lamp and a patient bear kept watch together, proof that love can cross the fiercest waters. True compassion leaves traces. Sometimes they come back to us in the most unexpected forms. Honor what was lost, and kindness will be remembered.